Today on the Mr. Maple podcast, Tim and Sean interview gardening's power couple, John and Adrienne Roethling.
Hey y'all, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Tim, and today we've got a fantastic podcast for you. We've got plant legends. We've got the plant power couple here in North Carolina. We've got Adrienne and John Roethling here for you today. So they're in charge of two different gardens here in Western North Carolina, or
Central.
Here in Central North Carolina. We've got the Paul Senior Botanical Garden, the Paul J. Senior Botanical Garden, and Ronaldo Gardens here at Wake Forest University. We just filmed and did a talk here at the Ronaldo Gardens, and afterward we said, hey, how about y'all jump in a podcast for us? And I really appreciate y'all jumping in today because y'all are a very interesting couple and a very interesting plant people.
Thank you.
Tree geeks unite, right?
Yep. Can I throw in a little herbaceous unite?
Oh, of course.
Herbaceous plants.
Of course.
Will allow.
So, first off, how does two tree geeks find one another? I mean, that's something that's very unusual. I mean, most people in the plant world, they go home, their significant other might enjoy some things that they do, but they're not a tree geek as well. Mm-hmm. So how did this all come about?
I actually grew up in Rochester, New York, and I was there till about 22 years old, and I left to go to Longwood Gardens. They had a 2-year professional horticulture program, and did that for 2 years, graduated, and somebody said, well, Adrienne, where would you like to go? I'm like, man, Rochester is not a very good place for horticulture. I mean, it is, but only like 6 months of the year. So somebody's like, well, what about somewhere in the South? And talked about Georgia, South Carolina, and somebody said, call Tony Avon at Plant Delights Nursery, and so I did. And that's what brought me down here.
So was it loving the garden at first sight?
It was for me.
True to form, it took me a little while. Yeah.
And growing up north, of course, my grandparents were always into their gardens. My aunt and uncle, they had a garden center. We worked in there. When I say we, I mean my sisters and I. We all worked in the garden center. In fact, my two sisters are also horticulturists in North Carolina. So we all wanted to make our way down here in somewhere where we can garden all year round. And John kind of has a different story.
Yeah, I was the youngest of 4 children. My dad, I was the first one that he let do anything in the garden. So it kind of took, and I remember when I turned 13, he was like, well, it's time for you, you got 2 years till you get a job. And so I got a job at New Garden Nursery in landscaping, worked there, ended up going to UNC Chapel Hill thinking pre-med, this way I can afford being a gardener. I don't know if it was organic chemistry or what that made me realize this isn't what I want to do with my life. I left Chapel Hill, which was hard to do, and enrolled at NC State. And while I was there, part-time working at Plant Delights Nursery, and all of a sudden here comes a new boss. And
me,
yeah,
I'm the new boss.
Still is.
So that's pretty spectacular. I mean, I have to say that's pretty awesome. So you did some work at the J.C. Rouse and Arboretum?
Yeah, so, we met working at Plant Delights in the botanical garden there, but, I finished up my degree. I've been doing some courses for some work at the Ralston for course credit. Luckily, Todd Lassane, who was my mentor, really worked with Bob Lyons, the director there, to cobble together funding to become Todd's assistant, a horticulturalist at the Arboretum, and then a year later, the research technician position opened up there. So I moved into that position. So it was my first real job after college, full time, and it planted a seed that had kind of lit the fires of a passion there.
So obviously being, that you've worked at the J.C. Rouston Arboretum, what's your thoughts on Japanese maples?
Oh, I mean, obviously working there, JC had the kind of, there were a few rules there, but I think one of the guiding things was the idea that no matter where you stood in the Arboretum, you should be able to see a Japanese maple. So, I mean, just like working at Tony's, at Plant Delights, and also at the Ralston, it's just like the doors were blown open of going, oh, you think you knew Japanese maples? Oh, yeah, I know Bloodgood. Well, all of a sudden, like, you're exposed to so many different cultivars and so many different varieties and different species of maples that it just, every time you think what there's more there.
That's an understatement. Like literally every time I go in and I start looking at Japanese maples, then I start realizing everything I don't know about Japanese maples, my mind's just blown. It's like the more doors you get into, the more doors open up and you're like, well, I wonder what happens with this. I wonder what's going on there.
I think that's one thing. I mean, for Adrienne and I remember we actually sat down with someone, Nell Lewis, who was a garden writer in Greensboro, and she was also a handwriting specialist. And she did both of our handwriting samples, and both of us, it was the, what was it?
Lifelong
learners. And I mean, that's, I think for both of us is we're never kind of like, oh yeah, I'm comfortable with what I know. It's kind of like, going to see lectures, learning more and more and more, because it's just, there's always more out there to learn.
And Adrienne, you studied at Longwood Gardens, and they've got some gorgeous Japanese maples out there as well.
Growing up in the north, you have so many wonderful maples species, sugar maples, silver maples, red maples, but there was always something special about seeing a very unique Japanese maple at a nursery, and it was very few, but when you saw them, it really stuck out, and it just was amazing to see. And everybody would be like, I got to save my money for at least one of those to have in the yard, and that's what they did. And then, yes, going to Longwood Gardens, the hillside especially, they had quite a few Japanese maples, and again, just special little pockets here and there, and they just weren't as popular, I think, probably because it was up north, and they grow up north, but still there was just something special about seeing one. And then coming to the south and opening my eyes even more while being at Plant Delights Nursery or J.C. Rouston Arboretum is just, now even with our gardens, it's like the Japanese garden has 65 different varieties, and it's just, you don't need flowers, because Japanese maples, they have a wonderful leaf emergence in spring that's some different colors. They have two-tone colors, the bark, and then again in fall color, the leaves change. You got this hue coming in on the bark, and then even in wintertime, you don't need flowers when you have a Japanese maple.
That is so true. I mean, I think people often start out planting annuals, and then they get to this point where they realize, I have to do this every year. And then they get into perennials and trees and shrubs, and they get to start looking at Japanese maples. And when you start looking at Japanese maples, you're like, all right, throw out the pansies. Let's put in Japanese maples. I don't have to do this every year. And it looks classier. I mean, it really does have this sophistication about it, and definitely grabs your attention. By the way, we have a tree called Acer japonicum longwood that was a seedling selection from Longwood Gardens. So something we might have to head your way to the Paul.
Oh, that would be great.
Paul J. Senior.
Put it on the shopping list for the Roethling Botanic Garden.
So, John, you've selected a number of different plants, and you have a selection of Circes that's sort of, traveled worldwide now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So Hearts of Gold Redbud, it was something that someone approached me in Greensboro about, can you come look at my redbud? It doesn't look quite right. It was in deep shade at that point, but it kind of had a chartreusey cast to it. And it's kind of like, don't think it's sick. And, I kind of had in the back of my head something's going on, so we sent some budwood off to Harold Neubauer of Hidden Hollow Nursery, now Harold and Alex, and they got it grafted. And I remember that first spring when Harold called, and he was just with that thick German accent, was so excited about it. And then, that was kind of one of my goals of, being in horticulture. It's like, I want to, have a plant introduced to commerce, and Hearts of Gold definitely kind of opened the door of, people were excited about that. It was the first gold leaf red bud. Of course, Ray Jackson quickly kind of swooped in and stole my thunder a year or two later with the rising sun coming in there. And, but, it's kind of fun to walk around and you go visit like the U.S. Botanic Garden. There's one planted out front there. You go to these different gardens, and, my parents, they kind of joke, since, we didn't have kids, it's their grand tree.
Well, I think it's so cool that you're always looking at plants. I know whenever Matt and I see you, we're always sitting there talking plants with you, because you're a fellow tree geek and you like looking at things. Like just today, you handed me an address of a witch's broom, and you said,
"Oh yeah, that's right.
This is a tree you should check out, Tim." And I mean, it's just constantly, you're like, "Hey, there's some Aesculus that are have these different color bloom colors," and I'm like, "That sounds awesome." And you pay attention to the details of plants, and that's the reason why I really enjoy our conversations. I mean, you're a fellow tree geek. Like the little nuances to the things that are truly different, like you pay attention to those things.
Well, I think that's the fun thing, and I think it's kind of like as you learn plants and you learn what is standard, and even I joke with people about, hey, if you see me on the highway, you might want to move away because I'm probably not looking at the road. But it's like I remember driving with Todd when we were at the Ralston together and down on the eastern part of the state, and he could tell when my head would whip around that something caught my eye, and that's how we found the Viburnum dentatum, which we named Golden Arrow. It was a gold sport viburnum, one of our native viburnums, just on the side of the road. But it's kind of like you got to get that base knowledge of knowing what the normal thing is, and then suddenly you drive by and that didn't look right.
I was doing that. My wife and I were headed to Pigeon Forge to Dollywood for Christmas to go see all the craziness. And I looked over on the side of the interstate and I said, "There is a golden bark Acernegundo." And I knew that there was another one out there, but I'm like, that's a different one. Like that's different from your normal Acernegundo. So got some signwood and started grafting it. And my wife was like, "What are you talking about?" My brother always laughs though, because I'll be driving and he'll spot a witch's broom and he'll try to think about whether or not he should tell me he found a witch's broom. Because if he says he found a witch's broom, my eyes are stuck up at the trees for the next 30 minutes looking for the next one while I'm driving.
I remember a trip with my dad on I-20 down in South Carolina, and my dad finally going, "Do you want me to drive?" I was really making him nervous because he could tell, at least one eye was, skewed a little right watching the side of the road.
Witch's brooms are these dwarf mutations that can happen in trees. We don't really always know exactly why. People have different theories on what causes them. But often if you graft those dwarf mutations, you can get a dwarf tree out of it. And so there's some definite benefits of these, natural blessings, as one of my friends calls it, that occur in nature. And by grafting those, you've got this cool little tree people can enjoy in their yard. And so there's so many fun things that you can find in nature if you just keep your eyes open. And that's so cool that, Adrienne was keeping her eyes open that day whenever she was walking in Plant Delight's garden and saw you walking around.
Well, it is an interesting story. I will tell it since you brought it up again. So I was training, and the curator before me, we were coming back from lunch, and we're walking back to the garden, and this is in front of the brick house in the back, and I see this gentleman, and Rodney goes, "Oh, Adrienne, I want to introduce you to John Roethling." And he stood up from weeding, and I said to myself, I'm like, that's the man I'm going to marry. And sure enough, we hit it off really well throughout the summer months. We kind of took our time, but by the end of the year, we're making it official.
And how many years has it been now?
It's officially been 20. On paper, it's been 20, but we've been together for 23 years.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I describe to people of going, in normal relationships, there's a check of going, I think we've bought enough plants, and there's no one in our relationship that's going to go, "You've got enough plants." It's always kind of like, "Oh yeah, why not more?"
So would you say that you guys are equally plant geeky, or is there one of you that's maybe a little more.
No,
well, it also depends on the plants. Like sometimes John will refer to me for herbaceous plants or annuals, and then I always refer to him for the woodies.
Yeah, it's a good relationship. She looks down, I look up.
That's the same thing that people say about me and Matt, because we're brothers and we're co-business partners, and we both keep agging each other on when it comes to the Japanese maples. It's like, we need to get a hold of that one. Oh yeah, we definitely do. You know, we have 1,500, but we definitely need one more.
When we moved from Raleigh to Winston-Salem, the back third of the truck was all plants. And so we opened up, big U-Haul, and the owner of the house that we bought the house from said, is there normal people stuff in that truck? And I mean, I'm sure you guys do the same, but we master stacking plants in a vehicle. We drove from Florida to Alabama to New York many times, full truck. We purposely pack light so that we can actually stack plants and bring them home.
Oh, I do the same thing. I pack, if I'm going on a short trip to out west, I will have one huge bag that barely has a few things in it. And then on the way back, I put my carry-on, all my clothes in my carry-on to bring back, stack the bag full of plants just to make sure everything gets back safely. And I mean, you gotta plan ahead for these things.
Yeah, and kudos to Brent and Becky's nursery for the bulb crates, because we've learned, go ahead and pack the car with empty bulb crates, because then you can stack higher.
Nice.
Good tips.
Yes.
Yeah, whenever it comes to plants, Japanese maples have always been my favorite. I know y'all both like Japanese maples. John, what are some of your favorite Japanese maples?
Bihu was always one. I remember first seeing that in Japan in, I think, 2005, and getting really excited seeing that. And when it came to the country, that's always been one that stood out for me. Kodo no Ito, I've always loved the texture of that, just the veil that it gives. Even the old. This goes back to me being a kid when my parents bought a $50 Crimson Queen that my dad was so proud of, and then it got put and it framed the pond, and when the pond got expanded, this Crimson Queen got shifted a little bit and the pond was built around it. So I that Japanese maple's been there since maybe 86, 89.
Yeah.
So and right next to it is a green one that we picked. We were in Rhode Island for a wedding, and my poor mom had to ride in the back seat with a Japanese maple in her face from Rhode Island to North Carolina. So
one of the things that took me forever to figure out was Crimson Queen's a classic Japanese maple, but where in the world did this tree come from? Who originated it? And it actually came from the Vercade family, who introduced so many conifers. They found Crimson Queen and introduced it in the nursery trade and put such a good name on it that it became a mainstream tree in the trade today. And I don't think it's ever going away. I mean, it is a beautiful tree, fantastic crimson fall color. And, a small little nursery found it, and it just became big and blew up everywhere. And it's crazy how many plants are like that. Yeah. I mean, Hearts of Gold would have not made it out there into the trade unless you said, hey, let's get this produced, and you sent budwood out. And it's crazy how plants, originate and then proliferate and then can be found everywhere.
Yeah, well, I'm not banking on retirement with that Hearts of Gold redbud, unfortunately, especially now that there's so many more out there. We'll keep trying, though. Our $5 million plant is out there somewhere.
So Adrienne, what about you? What are some of your favorite Japanese maples?
It's when you ask that question, I'm like, uh-oh. But I do have to say, I really do like Sangukaku, the coral barks. We had Tsukasa silhouettes planted at the front of the garden over at Senior Garden, flanking your entrance as you walk into the Welcome Center. And, they were okay. They give you two seasons of interest. One, Tsukasa silhouette is upright, and two, it's got nice big green leaves, or, not big green leaves, but green leaves. So it was okay. But then I remember back growing Sangukaku over at Juniper Level Botanic Garden at Plant Delight's nursery, and the winter sun would hit that coral bark and it would just glow. It'd be like on fire. And so I'm like, I want that. And so sure enough, we took those Tsukasa silhouettes out, replaced them with the Sangukakus, and there's not a person that goes by that doesn't stop and enjoy that tree, no matter what time of year it is.
Yeah, that's one of those trees that if you give it some sunlight, the bark intensifies a little bit with sunlight. If you put it in the shade, it's sometimes get lost. But with sunlight, that bark interest is super, super interesting. And as the winter approaches, it gets more and more intensely red. And so you've got a nice winter interest tree out there in the landscape that you can enjoy even when the leaves are off of it.
Right.
And that's something, I enjoy seeing the structures of Japanese maples and going out and seeing the shapes in the garden. But when you add a winter interest, you don't have to be like the bark interest on Sengokaku. You don't have to be a tree geek to appreciate that during the winter. I mean, it just glows like you're talking about. And definitely an amazing plant. I still don't know who introduced that one to date, but I'm guessing it's someone from Japan. The name translates as coral towers, and it's a classic tree. Underrated on its fall color. I mean, the yellow fall color on it is electric, especially with, as that bark starts intensifying. So definitely some good selections there for the Japanese maples.
So you guys both work for public gardens. Does that same passion go home with you at the end of the day, or does it kind of end? And when you get home, are you like that chef that says, I can't cook. I've been cooking all day and I can't cook it. I'm not cooking tonight.
We are those people that will go home and do something in the yard. I admit I'm lazy. I don't always want to do it when it's 90 degrees or whatever. But, our house that we purchased just 15 minutes from here is on 11 acres. And it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's heavily wooded, there's very little sun, and we'll never be able to garden the whole thing. We just want the peace and quiet. But the areas that we are going to garden are going to be really manicured. And we said, let's take a year, get to know the yard. Get to know the shadows, the tree lines, winter, summer, fall, spring, and really get to know the yard. Do we decide if we want to keep a tree, take down a tree? And that didn't happen. We just started planting no matter what. So there's just, like I said, that little bit of sun. So that's kind of my area because I can grow my herbaceous plants that I want. And then we're doing other things. We got containers. Oh, the containers are just, the house has a sunroom, so all our containers are in the sunroom right now. And
you missed at the talk earlier that I made the comment about buying the house of we're going to wait a little bit and before we do anything. And I think the day after we bought the house, one of your 10 for 10 popped up, and it's like, well, that goes out the window.
And then you want to go to big bloomers and we'll just get a few plants there. No, that's not going to happen when you go to big bloomers.
That's one of those things that when you see a plant that you want, it's hard to pass it up because you never know when that plant's going to pop up in front of you again, especially some of these rare plants. And it's so interesting that y'all both manage. I mean, before this, you were at High Point University managing the grounds there, and you had amazing plants in the gardens there. You've got Ronaldo Gardens now here at Wake Forest University. And the Paul J. Senior Botanical Garden has amazing plants everywhere. What would you say for a lot of our listeners who are Japanese maple enthusiasts who might have just been starting their own personal garden? What advice would you have for them in their garden?
When you were wrapping up the talk here for Ronaldo, you mentioned all your different podcasts that you have. So if you have a small space, hey, you guys have a podcast on container growing, and then you have it on fertilizing and watering. So there's resources out there for you. And even if you have like a little patio garden, you could still grow Japanese maples out there. They're pretty tough. They can handle a lot of conditions. Like you said, sunshade. They always offer a little bit of different texture and form. And you don't always have to worry about the ones that get up. You can keep the ones that hang low over a wall, in a container, as a dwarf. There's a Japanese maple out there for you somewhere. You will find it, I guarantee it.
I think, going out, obviously listening to podcasts and things like that, but, if you've got a botanical garden near you, go visit it. Then, even volunteering or just going there a lot. And then once you get plugged into the plant community, all these collectors and everything, and then you'll go see gardens and you just suddenly, it's kind of like, I feel like the gardening community is one of the most generous in the world, and they'll share knowledge. They'll share, oh, you really ought to try this Japanese maple, and seeing different ways to do things. Like, for me, one of the things that drives me crazy is when they take weeping plants and they'll either graft them onto a straight stick, and it just looks so unnatural. And I always loved that, visiting Ozzie Johnson down in Georgia, of just how he, really lets the plants, taking a low graft weeper and just snaking it up there, and it becomes living art. And I love that. I mean, one of the things that I'm most proud of from my time at the Ralston was there's that Celtis sinensis green cascade.
Love that plant.
As we bought that from Taylor's Nursery as like a 3-gallon, cut it off at like an inch and let it resprout. So it started pushing out this rapid growth, and we kept it in the nursery for about a year. And then we told the interns, we're like, go find the tallest pieces of bamboo that you can find. And they, it was kind of like, I'm going to outdo you. So everyone came back, and we planted that, where it is at the Ralston, and trained, kind of snaked it up. So, I mean, I love going there now, how many years later? Since 2005, 15, good God. But, it is that you experience the tree in a different way than you normally would experience a tree, of walking under it.
Now, one plant that I believe you might have planted there was the Tonkin wingnut.
Mm-hmm.
There at the J.C. Ralston. That thing's grew.
Yeah, I remember going to the Ralston with my dad one time, and he got a photo of me like hugging it, and I'm like, well, we're both a little bigger.
I remembered seeing that because Matt and I, we've got a good working relationship with Mark and the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and we, sometimes we'll collect seeds, sign wood. We have permissions and go in and let them know when we're going in and everything. But we collected a bunch of seed off of the Tonkin wingnut, and all along the back of the nursery, the Tonkin wingnuts now help on our nursery at MrMaple hold the bank in from washing away with the back creek. And there's probably 30 Tonkin wingnuts back there that now have calipers that are, a foot wide.
I mean, it's an amazing tree. I mean, because that I remember hand digging that tree out of the field nursery, and it was right after whenever that ice storm came through. I can't remember if it was 2001, 2002, where, the big white oak that framed the boxwood collection was just peeled like a banana. And, we're sitting there thinking, okay, we've got to reestablish shade quick. And we knew that was a quick growing tree. And boy, is it ever. I mean, you look at that and you'd think that, it's got to be decades old. And it's really, it's only been there, in its spot since 2005.
Now, Yadkin creeper, was that one that you'd helped get established into the nursery trade, or you planted one there on the Cainanthus retussus?
That one, I remember when Todd and I, we would be tasked to go get plants for like either, I don't know if it was the gala, and we went and visited Rob Means at Yadkin Valley Nursery, and walking through the greenhouses, and, Todd and I all of a sudden kind of like nudged each other and was like, did you see that? And, here's this, Chinese fringe tree that's not upright. It's kind of creeping through. And I think we had to, kind of like beg a little bit to get a plant. And so, we got that plant from Rob Means at Yadkin, and it didn't have a name on it. So that's why it got the name Yadkin Creeper. But, it's one of those things of going, maybe if we hadn't done it, kind of like you mentioned about the tree in Japan, about, if you don't share, there's always the chance if it's one tree, anything can happen. And, think about the number of plants that are still around because someone, propagated it. I mean, one of the best examples in horticulture is Franklinia. If horticulturalists had not collected that tree, it would be gone from the face of the earth.
Well, I just love Cainanthus retussus, Yadkin creeper, just because it has that sort of creeping habit. It still gets some really nice bark to it. It just has that plagiotropic type growth where it just goes every which way and doesn't really go upward unless you really do some staking up to it. And it's just such a fun tree because it takes everything you know about Cainanthus retussus, but then changes its habit and form.
Yeah.
And it just something unique and different.
I do wish that it would, maybe we need to start gathering seed off of it. I can't remember if it's a male or a female, but, it would be nice to get a strict weeper.
It would be. I think there was a Norfolk weeper that had a little bit more weeping habit to it, but there's not a lot in Cainanthus retussis that have been, those Chinese French trees have been selected. Yeah. So always cool. And, this is why I love talking with you, because hearing all these fun stories about plants. This is what drives us at MrMaple, is tree geeking out and getting to come talk about plants first, and then getting to come do a podcast and tree geek out a little bit more about plants is always a big positive.
To see places you don't normally see, and bring friends who you introduce to a new garden or new people, or half the audience knew me in there, so it was only appropriate to come and say hi. And
everyone knows you.
Oh, okay.
but I think that's the fun thing is, and I tell people sometimes the stories behind the plants are better than the plants themselves. But it's kind of like, they're also, great ways to have memories of, we got that, we picked that, Japanese maple out, like you were saying, celebration of, even looking to the names. I remember doing that when I was at High Point, when a student there had lost her mom right before she got there. And, they wanted to do a memorial tree. And I asked, what was the mother's name? And when they said it was Susan. And, I was like, well, there's a Susan magnolia. So, it's kind of fun to try to find a connection between trees and, especially when we're doing memorial trees. But, they're an easy way to kind of mark a memory, or, if someone has a new baby of, you can tell that kid, it was as tall as you were when it went on the ground.
We had a lady who was one of these deals where she had the kid with her, but she wanted to bury the placenta of that kid underneath a tree. And she's like, I've got it frozen. And, we're like, we don't know if this is going to kill the tree or not. I don't know. And she let the kid go around, and he started kicking a tree, and she's like, all right, he picked one out to plant it under. And it was a Shishigashira, and we're like, I hope that thing survives.
You haven't found out otherwise?
We have not found out otherwise.
Oh, my goodness.
So you can take it to all levels.
Phew.
I think I'll refrain from that.
But the stories behind the plants, that's one of the things that makes them special. And I know that just this weekend, we had 4 trees that I didn't realize was out for our open house. And it was Little Lamb, which is a witch's broom that we found in my uncle and aunt's yard. And my aunt passed away from cancer, and her name was Mary. And we just had named tentatively on the witch's broom Little Lamb, but the original broom had died. And then there were only 4 grafts from it that took, because if you graft from a witch's broom the very first time, you typically get a pretty poor take. And that's what happened for us, is a fairly poor take, and we only had 4. But this witch's broom, it was at the open house, and people were starting to grab it, and I was like, oh no, I'm about to lose this. So I had to literally run around and grab trees out of people's hands, because not only was this a tree that I couldn't get again, but it was a tree that had a real personal connection for me since my aunt had passed away. And, plants can do that. They can preserve memories. They can mean, more than the plant themselves because of the story behind them. And I think that's one of the things that's fun to share about plants, because not only are you sharing plants, but you're sharing memories as well.
It could be a conversation starter of, you can talk about why it was meaningful to you, and then, that starts a connection. And that's what I love about gardens and about plants, is it has a way of bringing people together. That's one of the things I love about Rinalda, is that, it's free and open to the public. So, it tends to be this place that people, can come to. During COVID, we were one of the gardens that, because we're kind of porous, we never shut down. And people came here, and, you'd see people put their lawn chairs 6 feet apart because this was a safe place to come, and they would stay connected. And it's kind of like, that's the power. I think that's what Adrienne and I love about public horticulture, is the way that it can mean so many different things to so many different people.
So this can be different for each of y'all, but when did you know that, being in public horticulture was what you were going to do for a living?
I'm thankful that we grew up without all this technology because we were always outside from sunup to sundown. And by the third whistle, if you weren't home, my dad would whistle 3 times. If you weren't home by the third one, I mean, it would be dark. It would be cold. Well, not so cold, but the fireflies would be out. And it's just like, you didn't have a reason to be inside. It was always outside. And we always loved that. But then, and we also grew up near farms. My uncle used to work on the farm. In fact, when we were little, it was married into my family, but I see this man on his tractor, and that would be my future uncle. And he started a produce stand, and we're like, okay, yeah, we can help you out with that. But my aunt, who married him, said, I got to do something with plants. So she really just kind of started this nursery and then struck that chord with us as far as plants. And then I saw this ad in the back of a magazine, Horticulture magazine or something, and it said something about Longwood Gardens horticulture program. And so I applied and was accepted. And I really did like Longwood Gardens. I really liked being out in the garden. I liked seeing people's faces. Now, Longwood is like Disney, but people loved seeing all the different plants and whatnot. It was just the kids running and seeing the fireworks and everything. It's like, I really need to be in a spot where I can enjoy people's faces when they see plants or see our displays or something like that. And really, it was Longwood Gardens that made me appreciate it. And then I went to Tony Avents, who had open house weekends, but had an incredible garden. And man, Tony he was everywhere. Martha Stewart in all these different countries. So everybody knew then that I was surrounded by beauty and this amazing place. And then it just kind of opened the door Todd really opened the door to Paul J. Cedar Botanical Garden as an open public garden every day of the year. And I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to do it. And again, just introducing myself to people, seeing people's faces, it's all about what we can do for them.
I think for me, I mean, like I said, my dad, I was the only one that he let garden. And then, when I was at NC State working at the Roethling, it was just kind of like this, like I talked about earlier about that, constantly learning. And it was just, I joke that I feel like a couple of my jobs, there was no learning curve. It was a learning wall. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I know perennials. And then I go to Tony's and I'm like, I don't know squat. And same thing for going to the Roethling of suddenly, I've never heard, 90% of what's in front of me. And it was this challenge of constantly learning. But then, Todd was good about pushing me through doors of, he was the one that said, okay, I want you to call these people in Georgia, including Michael Durr, and go arrange a trip and go down and visit him. And it's this community, and it started at the Roethling, really, of going, man, I love this. And, I left the Roethling Arboretum and went to work for Plant Haven, which is kind of like the business side of plants. It's, patenting, it's licensing. And for me, after a while, it's kind of like the relationships I was able to build while I was at the Roethling, of having to tell someone that you built this relationship, hey, I can't license you for that plant. I don't know, it just didn't sit with me. And it's kind of like, this is what I love. And, when I went to High Point University of being able to create all those gardens there and everything, it just kept building. And then, when we came out here, when I was first approached about this job, and I was out here on a Sunday and I just watched people, and it was like, this place has a life to it. And that I was hooked, and I was like, I want this job. And I love it. I love being able to, chat with people that they walk here every day. This is part of their life. And it's kind of like you just suddenly realize how important gardens and green spaces are to people. At the height of COVID, when, all the political unrest in this country, it's kind of like people really value that there was this place that they could come that had beauty, that they could just be. That they could see the bulbs or walk the trails, and it's kind of like I don't take that for granted, that we can create these spaces that can impact people's lives.
Yeah, and I think that's a big important thing. There's a therapeutic something therapeutic about being out in nature, and especially gardening and putting your hands in the soil and going out there and just relaxing and maybe sometimes breaking a sweat, doing something and creating something out in your garden for you to enjoy, for others to enjoy. While y'all have these amazing gardens that you can do that tons of people can see, a lot of people can do this in their own garden too and start to, get that therapy they need by going out and, putting in their own garden in their backyard, and something that they can share with their family and friends. And then, they can always come and volunteer at the Paul Senior or Ronaldo Gardens as well. So there's so many different ways for them to get involved and get that therapy of working in the garden.
Yeah, and I think what's nice is it's kind of like you don't have to start with, I have to have this huge garden. Just get a container. You can start small, and I think what's great about our community is, JC saying about if you're not killing plants, you're not learning. Of understanding that, I hate it when people go, I have a brown thumb. And it's like, that's not a genetic condition. It's like you can learn, and there are people here that get joy out of teaching you how to, grow a vegetable garden. I mean, I'll admit I can't grow a vegetable to save my life. But, I love listening and learning from people. But, and I think that's what's amazing about this the gardening community is it's kind of like we all share, and I love our, even our industry where, you're competitors, but you always help each other out. It's a gigantic family. And I think there's not many industries that you could say that.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I think our industry has really, it suffered a little bit during the pandemic because, people couldn't really go to visit nurseries or some public gardens. But then also on the other side of that, people realize, hey, you know what? I was going to take this trip somewhere, but now I can't because of COVID. Maybe I'll put that money towards new landscape or plants or something where I can beautify my yard. And I think that's continuing even to this day. I have a feeling that people are just enjoying their own yards more and more now.
Well, even balcony gardening. I think there was a boom in balcony gardening that you didn't see before the pandemic.
Yep, that's so true.
That, indoor plants. I mean, it's kind of like suddenly people realized, oh, wait, this kind of brings some joy to me, and, to come home and enjoy these things. And it's satisfying. And, it's scalable. It's kind of like if you just want to do a container, just do a container. And, I think I always tell people, it's like, does this look good? And it's like, does it bring you joy? And, that's all that matters, really.
So true. Well, y'all, I really appreciate y'all jumping on our podcast today. Make sure everybody that you subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like button. And as always, y'all, we really appreciate Adrienne and John Roethling jumping in today. Y'all remember to shop on MrMaple.com and come out and visit Ronaldo Gardens and the Paul J. Senior Botanical Gardens. Senior. Paul J. Senior Botanical Gardens in Kernersville, North Carolina, y'all, because they've just got amazing gardens.
Thank you.
And they work hard to add this beauty out here and make this place a relaxing place for you to enjoy. So make sure you come out here and visit. And if you see them walking around, make sure to say hey as well.
Please do.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.